They thought the estate plan was set in stone. The Hamptons property was already in escrow for over $4 million. My family relegated me to packing up his dusty bedroom, treating me like the hired help they usually employed. That is where I found the sealed envelope taped behind his antique mirror. A new document, notarized, dated exactly 7 days before his heart stopped. I walked downstairs into their champagne celebration, dropped the pages on the glass table, and watched the color drain from their faces. My mother lunged to tear the paper apart. I pulled it back. Their reaction was not grief. It was pure terror. My name is Clara Sterling. I am 32 years old and work as a forensic accountant. Before I show you how I dismantled my family legacy, tell me in the comments where you are listening from right now. If you have ever had to fight back against a golden child, hit the like button and subscribe. The clink of crystal echoed up the grand staircase. Down in the living room, Richard and Vivian Sterling were celebrating. My sister Chloe and her husband Marcus Hayes joined them, raising flutes of expensive champagne. They had just secured a buyer for Grandpa William's estate, $4.2 million pending a final signature based on a 5-year-old will. 10 years ago, my parents threw me out of their Upper East Side townhouse with a single duffel bag because I refused to take the fall for Chloe cheating on her university entrance exams. I paid my own way through college. I earned my CPA license. Now they only allowed me in this house to pack up Grandpa William's belongings. To them, I was free labor. To me, it was a chance to say a proper goodbye to the only man who ever asked about my day. I was clearing out his mahogany dresser when a loose floorboard caught my heel. I stumbled against the heavy oak mirror leaning against the wall. The glass shifted. Taped to the wooden backing was a thick manila envelope. My name was written across the front in his shaky, deliberate cursive. Inside was a crisp legal document bearing the red seal of a New York notary public, a revised last will and testament. It revoked all previous documents. It left the Hamptons estate and the entirety of his trust to me. I walked down the curved staircase. The laughter in the living room was loud. Chloe was talking about using her share of the sale to expand her cosmetics brand. Marcus, a corporate merger lawyer who always wore custom suits, nodded along, calculating his own cut. I stepped onto the Persian rug and dropped the envelope onto the glass coffee table. The slap of heavy paper cut through their celebration. "Cancel the escrow," I said, keeping my voice level. "The house is not for sale." Richard lowered his glass, his face flushed red. "What kind of joke is this, Clara? Get back upstairs and finish packing." I tapped the document. "Grandpa William updated his estate plan last week. He left the property and the trust to me." Chloe scoffed, rolling her eyes. Vivian moved first. My mother darted forward, her manicured hands grasping for the paper. Her intent was clear. Destroy the evidence. I anticipated the move, sliding the envelope out of her reach and stepping back. Vivian stood there, breathing heavy. Richard stood up, his chest heaving. The usual arrogant dismissal vanished from his posture. They were not looking at a rebellious daughter. They stared at the folder like it was a live grenade. A normal family would argue about fairness or cry over the deceased. My parents exchanged a look of pure panic. Marcus set his champagne flute down. His lawyer instincts kicked in, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the threat. "Why are you so terrified of losing a house?" I asked. The air in the room turned freezing cold. Richard took a step toward me, his hands curling into fists. Marcus adjusted his cuffs. He moved between Richard and me, acting as the designated shield for the Sterling family. As a senior partner in mergers and acquisitions at a top Manhattan firm, Marcus made his living tearing apart hostile corporate takeovers. He was a tall, imposing African-American man who commanded boardrooms with a quiet, lethal grace. Right now, he viewed me not as a grieving granddaughter, but as a minor regulatory hurdle that needed to be swatted away. "Let us take a breath," Marcus said. His voice was smooth, engineered to de-escalate and dominate simultaneously. "Hand me the document, Clara. We can review this like rational adults." I kept my fingers firmly planted on the manila folder. "Rational adults do not lunge at legal documents like starving animals," I replied. Marcus offered a patronizing smile. He leaned against the edge of the glass coffee table, invading my personal space just enough to establish authority. "You have a piece of paper. That is all you have." William was 89 years old. He forgot his own address twice last month. Any probate judge in New York will look at a last-minute will change and immediately rule a lack of testamentary capacity. Chloe stepped out from behind her husband. Her designer heels clicked sharply against the hardwood floor. "You manipulated him," she sneered, pointing a trembling finger at my face. "You spent months whispering in his ear, taking advantage of a sick old man just to steal what belongs to us." The hypocrisy hung thick in the air. 10 years ago, the family dynamic had been cemented in a strikingly similar confrontation. I was 18 years old. Chloe had been caught buying stolen exam papers to secure her university admission. My parents demanded I take the blame, claiming my academic record could survive the suspension, while Chloe needed a pristine reputation for her future sorority. When I refused to fall on my sword to cover up her laziness, Richard packed my bags himself. He left me on the sidewalk in the pouring rain with $40 and a bus ticket. They protected their golden child at all costs. Now, standing in the same opulent house, they were employing the exact same strategy. Protect Chloe, crush Clara. Marcus continued his legal barrage, snapping my attention back to the present. "If you try to file that garbage, I will personally tie you up in litigation for the next decade. We will allege undue influence. We will drag your name through civil court. You will drain whatever meager savings you have paying retainer fees, and in the end, we will still secure the estate. Be smart. Walk away right now and we pretend this never happened." Richard saw Marcus gaining ground and stepped back into the fray, eager to deliver the killing blow. He puffed out his chest, his face purple with indignation. "Listen to your brother-in-law, Clara. You think you can outsmart us just because you run some spreadsheets for a living. I play golf with 2 members of the state accounting board." He took another step forward, lowering his voice into a guttural growl. "You file that fraudulent paper, and I will make a phone call. I will file an ethics complaint alleging financial exploitation of a vulnerable senior citizen. You will lose your certified public accountant license. Your career in forensic accounting will vanish overnight. You will be blacklisted across the entire financial sector before the week is over." They waited for my shoulders to slump. They expected the familiar retreat of the teenage girl they had banished a decade ago. They expected fear. I looked at Richard. Then I looked at Marcus. My heart maintained a steady resting rhythm. In my line of work investigating corporate fraud and tracing hidden assets, I faced down cartel money launderers and corrupt executives who had far more power than a bloated Hamptons socialite. A bullying father and an arrogant corporate lawyer were nothing but predictable data sets. I picked up the envelope and held it out toward them. Richard smirked, reaching out to snatch it. "Good girl. You finally learned how things work in the real world." He pulled the paper out of the unsealed flap. His eyes scanned the text. The smirk faltered. The color drained from his cheeks. "This is a photocopy," Richard muttered. I smiled. The expression was entirely devoid of warmth. I directed my gaze past my father, focusing entirely on the lawyer in the room. "Marcus," I said, keeping my tone conversational, "you passed the bar exam. You know the penal code. What is the penalty for the intentional destruction of a testamentary instrument under federal and state law?" Marcus stiffened. The smooth, negotiated calm evaporated from his face. His posture shifted from predatory to defensive in a fraction of a second. I took a step closer, ensuring every word landed with precision. "You thought I brought the original document into a house full of people who have a massive financial motive to see it burn. I am an investigator. I secure my evidence. The original will complete with the wet ink signatures of 2 independent witnesses, and an attending physician's statement verifying his absolute mental clarity has been sitting inside a fireproof safe at my managing partner's law firm for over an hour." The silence returned to the living room, heavier and far more dangerous than before. The clinking of the champagne glasses felt like a distant memory. "If you want to contest it," I continued, addressing Marcus directly, "you will have to explain to a probate judge why the Sterling family was attempting to execute a real estate transaction using an outdated will while actively trying to suppress the deceased's final wishes. That is not just a civil dispute over property. That borders on criminal conspiracy to commit wire fraud, considering the funds were about to be wired across state lines." Marcus looked at Richard. The unspoken alliance between the wealthy father-in-law and the star son-in-law showed its very first fracture. Marcus knew I had cornered them. A corporate lawyer survives on his pristine reputation, and I had just threatened to drag his name into a messy public fraud investigation. His eyes darted to the photocopy in Richard's hands, realizing the trap he had almost walked into. Vivian broke the silence. Her voice was shrill, stripping away her refined society matron persona to reveal the viciousness underneath. "Get out of my house. It is my house now, Mother," I corrected her. "You ungrateful little pest." Vivian hissed, her hands shaking. "We will see you in court. We will ruin you so thoroughly you will not be able to find a job scanning receipts in a basement." I turned toward the front door. The polished marble floor felt solid beneath my boots. I did not need to raise my voice. The facts were loud enough to echo. "I am giving you 48 hours to halt the escrow process on this property. If the listing is not pulled by Monday morning, I will file an injunction and request a formal audit of Grandpa Williams' accounts." I walked out, leaving the heavy oak front door wide open behind me. The crisp evening air hit my face, clearing the stench of their expensive perfume and cheap lies. I won the skirmish, but the war had just begun. The Sterlings operated on social currency and ruthless manipulation. If they could not beat me with legal threats in the privacy of their living room, they would try to destroy my credibility in front of the entire city. As I walked down the driveway toward my car, my forensic mind started piecing together their reactions. The sheer panic, the immediate leap to destroy the document. A wealthy family losing a $4 million property would be angry, yes, but they would not be terrified. There was a hidden liability here, something buried deep in the estate finances that they desperately needed to control. Their perfect opportunity to shut me out and reclaim the narrative was only 4 days away. The funeral. I pulled my phone from my pocket and dialed my legal counsel. We needed to prepare the next strike before my mother could mobilize her high society connections to lock me out of my own grandfather's memorial. They thought they could use public shame to break me. I was about to show them that public shame is a weapon that swings in both directions. 4 days later, the sky over Manhattan broke open. Rain poured down the Gothic stone facade of a prominent cathedral on the Upper East Side. It was the perfect backdrop for my mother's performance. The Sterling family never viewed a funeral as a time for mourning. To them, a memorial service was a networking event draped in black designer fabric. I stepped out of a yellow cab, clutching a dark umbrella. I wore a simple charcoal suit appropriate for burying the only man who ever loved me. But as I approached the heavy wooden doors of the vestibule, 2 men in tailored suits stepped into my path. They were not church ushers. The earpieces curled behind their necks gave them away. "Private security." "Name, please," the taller one asked, blocking the entrance. "Clara Sterling. I am the deceased's granddaughter." The guard checked a tablet, feigning ignorance. "I am sorry, ma'am. You are on the restricted list. The family has requested privacy from specific individuals." Through the glass panels of the inner doors, I could see the grand nave, pews packed with hedge fund managers, state politicians, and socialites. And there, near the baptismal font, stood Vivian. She was dressed in an elegant mourning veil, dabbing her eyes with a lace handkerchief while whispering to a federal judge. I did not need to guess what she was saying. My phone had been buzzing all morning with cautious texts from old college acquaintances. Vivian was deploying her most lethal weapon, social exile. She was telling the New York elite that I was currently under federal investigation for financial elder abuse. She was painting a picture of a greedy, estranged daughter who returned only to swindle a dying man out of his fortune. In their world, reputation was currency, and Vivian was spending millions to bankrupt my credibility. The security guard shifted his weight, anticipating a scene. He expected me to shout, to throw a tantrum, to demand entry, so my mother could point at me and whisper to her wealthy friends, "Look how unstable she is." I offered him nothing. I stepped back under the cover of the stone archway, out of the pouring rain, and leaned against a pillar. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I dialed my attorney, pressing the speaker to my ear. "Are they in position?" I asked. "Waiting on your signal," the voice on the other end replied. "Execute the order." I hung up. I did not move. I just stood there watching the rain wash the city streets, tracking the minutes on my watch. While my parents spent the last 96 hours hiring security and crafting a smear campaign, I had been standing in front of a Manhattan judge. When a disputed will involves millions in liquid assets, and real estate courts do not play games. I presented the notarized document, the attending physician's report, and sworn affidavits from the two witnesses. I also presented digital proof of the pending Hamptons sale that Richard tried to push through using the voided paperwork. The judge recognized the immediate risk of asset dissipation. He granted an emergency ex parte injunction. Inside the cathedral, the organ music swelled and faded. Chloe took the podium. Through the thick glass, I could hear her voice echoing over the microphone, trembling with practiced grief. Grandpa William was our anchor. She wept, gripping the edges of the wooden lectern. He taught me everything about integrity, about building my business with honest hands. Right on cue. A black Suburban pulled up to the curb, splashing water against the pavement. 4 men and 1 woman stepped out. They wore sharp, nondescript business attire. They carried thick leather briefcases and projected an air of unquestionable authority. They were court-appointed forensic auditors accompanied by a process server from the New York State Supreme Court. The security guards stepped forward to block them. Court order, the lead auditor stated flatly, flashing a metallic badge and a stack of blue-backed legal papers. Interfere, and you will be arrested for obstructing a judicial mandate. The guards backed down instantly. Private muscle does not mess with state officials. I folded my umbrella and followed the auditors through the heavy doors. We walked straight down the center aisle. Chloe was mid-sentence, dabbing her eyes. We will honor his memory by protecting the family he built. She looked up. The microphone caught her sharp intake of breath. The entire congregation turned. 200 members of the Manhattan elite shifted in their pews to watch 5 grim-faced officials and the estranged daughter march toward the altar. Richard stood up from the front row, his face twisting into a mask of outrage. "What is the meaning of this? Have some respect." The lead auditor did not lower his voice. He did not care about the venue or the audience. He cared about the law. "Richard Sterling," he announced, his voice carrying effortlessly to the back of the cathedral. "You are hereby served with a judicial freeze order regarding the estate of William Sterling. All bank accounts, trust funds, real estate holdings, and safety deposit boxes are officially locked pending a full forensic audit. Any attempt to move, hide, or liquidate assets as of this exact moment will be prosecuted as contempt of court and wire fraud." The silence in the cathedral was suffocating, the kind of silence that follows a terrible crash. The process server handed a thick stack of documents directly to my father. Richard stared at the papers, his hands trembling. The arrogant patriarch who threatened to ruin my career just 4 days ago looked like he had been struck by a physical blow. His face turned an unnatural shade of gray. Vivian gripped the edge of the pew. Her mourning veil could not hide the sheer panic widening her eyes. The judges and socialites she had been whispering to moments ago were now shifting uncomfortably, leaning away from her. In high society, nothing is more contagious than the stench of a federal audit. The narrative she had carefully spun all morning unraveled in 10 seconds. I was not the one under investigation. They were. Marcus, sitting beside Vivian, kept his head down. He refused to look at his father-in-law. The corporate lawyer knew exactly what a court-mandated asset freeze meant. It meant their financial secrets were about to be dragged into the sunlight. He adjusted his collar, looking for an exit strategy. Chloe remained frozen at the podium. The microphone picked up her ragged, panicked breathing. She did not look at the coffin. She did not look at her grieving mother. She looked directly at Marcus, her eyes wide with a very specific, undeniable terror. "What about the company transfers?" Chloe whispered. She thought she was speaking quietly, but in the dead silent church, the sensitive microphone broadcasted her panicked question to every single person in the room. Company transfers. My forensic accountant brain latched onto those 2 words. Why would a grief-stricken granddaughter care about corporate bank transfers the second her grandfather's assets were frozen? The estate had nothing to do with her independent cosmetics brand. Chloe sold overpriced skincare products online. She had no reason to panic over her grandfather's trust fund being audited, unless the brand was not independent at all. I looked at Chloe, watching her grip the podium until her knuckles turned white. The puzzle pieces started aligning in my mind: the rapid attempt to sell the Hamptons house, the aggressive legal threats from Marcus, the sheer terror at the idea of a forensic accountant gaining access to the family ledgers. The fight was no longer just about a real estate inheritance. I had just cracked open a vault, and the Sterling family was terrified of what I was about to find inside. The heavy oak doors of the Cathedral slammed shut behind me. The rain had intensified, washing the Manhattan pavement in a cold, gray slick. I stood under the stone archway waiting for my car. The whispers from the congregation were still echoing in my ears. The social execution of Vivian Sterling was a masterpiece, but my focus had already shifted to the bizarre comment my sister made at the podium. Before my cab could pull up to the curb, the heavy doors burst open again. Chloe marched out into the downpour. She did not bother with an umbrella. The pristine mourning veil she wore moments ago was pushed back, her immaculate hair plastering to her face. She was not playing the grieving granddaughter anymore. The elegant facade had shattered. "You ruined everything," Chloe screamed. Her voice cracked, shrill and desperate, echoing down the empty sidewalk. I turned to face her, keeping my hands inside my trench coat pockets. The forensic auditors were already gone, leaving me alone with the family golden child. "You had to make a scene," Chloe shrieked, closing the distance between us. "You could not just take a payout. You had to lock down the accounts. Do you have any idea what you just did to my company?" She swung her arm and hurled her beige Hermes Birkin bag directly at my head. I stepped to the side. The $30,000 leather purse sailed past my shoulder and landed with a heavy splash in a muddy puddle near the storm drain. I looked at the ruined bag, then back at my sister. The math did not add up. "Why does a freeze on Grandpa William's personal estate affect your independent cosmetics brand?" I asked. My tone was flat, devoid of the hysteria she was projecting. Chloe breathed heavily, rain dripping from her chin. "You are starving my brand. Aura Blanc needs that capital. We have vendors. We have a product launch next week. You are destroying my life." Marcus burst through the church doors a second later. He grabbed Chloe's arm, pulling her back toward the idling black SUV. His face was a mask of sheer panic. He knew his wife was talking too much. He shoved her into the back seat, shooting me a look of pure venom before slamming the door and ordering the driver to speed away. I stood alone in the rain. The gears in my mind were spinning at full capacity. Chloe had spent the last 3 years gracing the covers of minor business magazines, touted as a self-made beauty mogul. She constantly boasted about Aura Blanc Cosmetics, a luxury skincare line that supposedly generated millions in revenue. My parents treated her like the next great American entrepreneur, frequently comparing her supposed success to my dull, invisible career as an accountant. Yet standing in the rain, Chloe had just confessed that a sudden freeze on an 89-year-old man's retirement accounts would bankrupt her thriving business. A legitimate, profitable company does not rely on a grandfather's trust fund to pay its vendors. I got into my cab and gave the driver the address to my office in the financial district. The civil dispute over a Hamptons property was officially over. I was now looking at the anatomy of a financial crime. My office was dark and quiet on a Sunday afternoon. I sat at my desk, booted up my dual monitors, and logged into my professional databases. In my daily work, I unraveled complex offshore accounts, traced missing corporate assets, and mapped out embezzlement schemes for litigators. Tracking the footprint of a boutique cosmetics brand was elementary. I started with public tax filings and the Delaware Division of Corporations Registry. Chloe had incorporated Aura Blanc 4 years ago. I pulled the Dun & Bradstreet reports and accessed state-level uniform commercial code filings. I wanted to see her debt structure, her declared revenue, and her operating costs. The data materialized on my screen, telling a story that contradicted every magazine interview Chloe had ever given. Aura Blanc Cosmetics was a financial black hole. According to the state tax filings, Chloe's company had reported a net operating loss for 36 consecutive months. Her customer acquisition costs were astronomical. Her inventory turnover ratio was pathetic. She was spending a fortune on marketing influencer parties and lavish launch events, but moving almost no actual product. The business generated a fraction of what it cost to keep the lights on. I leaned back in my chair, staring at the glowing numbers. Chloe drove a Range Rover, lived in a Tribeca penthouse, and threw Hermes bags into puddles. A CEO of a failing startup does not live like a billionaire. They file for bankruptcy, unless the startup is not meant to be profitable, unless the startup is a washing machine. I dug deeper, shifting my focus to the vendor payments and the capitalization tables. How was Aura Blanc staying afloat despite burning cash? I traced the incoming investments. The capital injections did not come from venture capitalists or angel investors. They came from a series of obscure, limited liability companies registered in Wyoming and Nevada. Using my forensic software, I cross-referenced the registered agents of those anonymous LLCs. The trail of breadcrumbs led directly to Richard Sterling. My father had set up shell companies to funnel money into Aura Blanc. But Richard did not have that kind of liquid cash on his own. His consulting firm had taken a massive hit during the recent economic downturn. So where was he getting millions of dollars to pump into Chloe's fake cosmetics empire? The answer was sitting in the manila envelope I had found behind the mirror. The estate of William Sterling. For years, my parents had controlled my grandfather's finances. They had medical power of attorney and access to his retirement accounts. They had been slowly siphoning his wealth, transferring the funds into anonymous shell companies, and then injecting that stolen money into Aura Blanc Cosmetics under the guise of venture capital. Chloe would then pay herself an exorbitant salary from the company accounts, claiming the income was legitimate business revenue. It was a textbook case of placement layering and integration. My family was not just greedy. They were running a sophisticated money laundering operation. The realization settled over me like a heavy winter chill. This explained everything. It explained why Marcus had threatened me with such desperation in the living room. As a corporate lawyer, Marcus likely helped structure those anonymous shell companies. It explained why Vivian was so determined to ruin my reputation and lock me out of the funeral. Most importantly, it explained why they were willing to risk everything to sell the Hamptons estate using the forged 2019 will. The money laundering scheme had drained their primary accounts. They needed the $4 million from the house sale to cover their tracks before anyone noticed the missing funds from William's trust. When I filed the injunction and froze the estate, I did not just stop a real estate transaction. I cut off the oxygen to their criminal enterprise. I selected all the files on my screen and hit print. The heavy machine in the corner of my office hummed to life, spitting out pages of irrefutable evidence. Bank routing numbers, shell company registrations, fake investment portfolios. I stacked the papers into a neat pile. My parents had spent my entire life convincing the world that I was a failure while placing Chloe on a pedestal. They kicked me out in the cold to protect her academic lies. Now, they had stolen millions from a dying man to fund her vanity project. They thought they could bully me into submission. They forgot that numbers do not bend to social pressure. Numbers do not care about country club memberships or custom suits. Numbers only tell the truth. I reached for my phone to call the federal authorities. Submitting this file to the Internal Revenue Service and the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network would trigger a federal indictment. I was ready to burn the Sterling family legacy to ash. Before my finger could press the call button, an incoming email notification flashed across my monitor. The sender was the senior managing partner of my accounting firm. The subject line consisted of 2 words: immediate suspension. I clicked open the message. My heart rate stayed flat, but my jaw clenched. Richard Sterling had struck back. He knew he could not beat me in a court of law with his current hand, so he decided to sever my lifeline. The email detailed an anonymous whistleblower complaint filed against me, accusing me of corporate espionage and unauthorized data breaches involving high-profile clients. My access to the firm network was being revoked in real time. My company email disconnected. The screen went black. Richard had just declared war on my career. He wanted to strip away my credentials, isolate me from my resources, and starve me into signing over the inheritance. He thought breaking my professional life would force a surrender. I packed the printed evidence into my briefcase. They wanted to play dirty. It was time to show them that a forensic accountant with nothing to lose is the most dangerous enemy they could ever make. Let them think they had the upper hand. I would gladly let them walk into my trap. My desk phone rang the second my computer monitors went dark. The digital display on the console flashed the extension for the managing partner. I did not need to guess the nature of the summons. Richard Sterling operated like a seasoned corporate raider. He understood that neutralizing a threat required striking multiple vulnerabilities simultaneously. He knew I possessed the skills to dismantle his financial facade, so he moved swiftly to strip away my institutional backing. I picked up the receiver. "My office," Clara David said. His tone held no room for negotiation. I walked down the glass-walled corridor of the accounting firm. The usual hum of adding machines and murmured conference calls felt distant. David sat behind his expansive desk, his hands resting flat on top of a thick, unmarked leather binder. He did not invite me to sit. 30 minutes ago, a courier delivered this directly to our legal department. David began tapping the heavy binder. "It is a formal ethics complaint filed against you." The claimant provided a detailed log of IP addresses, server access requests, and internal search queries. He slid the binder across the polished mahogany surface. "According to these documents, you utilized firm resources to conduct an unauthorized backdoor audit on a former client of ours, a consulting firm owned by your father. The complaint alleges corporate espionage, breach of fiduciary duty, and a direct violation of client confidentiality agreements." I looked down at the neatly tabulated pages. Richard was meticulous. He had hired someone to fabricate digital footprints, masking them just enough to look like my signature investigative style. In the high-stakes financial sector, confidentiality is the foundation of existence. A certified public accountant caught prying into a business without a mandate is instantly radioactive. "I did not execute those searches," I replied, keeping my voice steady. "The logs are manufactured. This is retaliation for a private legal dispute regarding my grandfather's estate." David sighed, running a hand over his face. He looked tired, acting as a man protecting his enterprise from unnecessary liability. "It does not matter if it is a family dispute, Clara. The claimant copied the state licensing board on the submission. They are initiating an independent review. If these allegations gain traction, you will lose your CPA license permanently. You will be barred from operating in any financial institution in the country." He opened his top drawer and pulled out a standardized corporate form. "Until the state board concludes their inquiry, I have no choice," David said, pushing the paper toward me. "You are suspended indefinitely without pay. Surrender your security badge and your firm-issued phone. A normal employee facing the sudden unjust destruction of a decade-long career would protest. They would yell, demand an internal tech review, or beg for a chance to clear their name." Richard counted on that reaction. He wanted me panicked, expending all my energy fighting a bureaucratic nightmare so I would abandon the fight over the inheritance. I unclipped the security badge from my lapel and placed it gently on top of the fabricated dossier. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I pulled the company smartphone from my pocket and set it next to the badge. "I understand your position, David," I said, my voice echoing a chilling calm. David frowned, clearly unnerved by my lack of resistance. He expected tears or rage. Instead, he got quiet compliance. I turned and walked out of his office, grabbed my personal briefcase from my desk, and headed straight for the elevator bank. I stepped out onto the bustling pavement of the financial district. The midday sun reflected harshly off the surrounding skyscrapers. Pedestrians rushed past, clutching briefcases and coffees, oblivious to the silent warfare consuming my life. My personal cell phone vibrated in my coat pocket. The screen illuminated with a new text message. The sender was Vivian. The message was brief, transactional, and ruthlessly timed. "Withdraw the probate filing. I will tell your father to contact his associates and cancel the ethics complaint. Do not throw your future away over a house, Clara." I stared at the glowing text. A slow, razor-sharp smile formed on my lips. My parents truly believed they had executed a masterstroke. They thought backing me into a corner would force a swift surrender. They assumed the threat of losing my professional identity would break my spirit, compelling me to sign away the $4 million property to save my license. They made a fatal miscalculation. By sending that text message, Vivian had just handed me documented proof of extortion. She linked the professional sabotage directly to the real estate dispute in writing. More importantly, they misunderstood the nature of my profession. A forensic accountant is not dangerous because of a corporate badge or a firm-issued laptop. A forensic accountant is dangerous because of how her mind processes anomalies. They also failed to realize the strategic advantage they had just handed me. While employed by the firm, my investigative methods were strictly bound by corporate compliance and ethical red tape. I had to request permission to subpoena records. I had to follow rigid chains of command. Suspension meant I was no longer a corporate employee. I was a rogue operative with unlimited free time, armed with the offshore bank routing numbers I had printed right before my computer shut down. Richard thought he disarmed me. In reality, he simply removed my leash. I hailed a cab and directed the driver toward my apartment. The strategy required a pivot. Fighting the ethics complaint through official channels would take months. I did not have months. I needed to end this war in days. To do that, I had to feed their arrogance. I had to make them believe their brutal extortion tactic had worked perfectly. When a predator thinks the prey is dead, they drop their guard. I sat on my living room sofa, spreading the printed evidence of Chloe's money laundering scheme across the coffee table. The fake venture capital injections. The shell companies registered in Nevada. The illicit transfers from Grandpa William's retirement accounts. It was a beautiful, damning mosaic of federal crimes. To detonate this evidence effectively, I needed to gather the entire Sterling syndicate in one room. I needed a venue where they felt invincible. I needed an environment controlled by them where their inflated egos would drive them to admit their leverage on the record. I picked up my phone and opened a blank message addressed to Marcus Hayes. As the legal architect of the family, Marcus would be the one handling the formal surrender. I needed to stroke his ego, making him feel like the victorious negotiator who successfully crushed the rebellious sister-in-law. I typed the message with deliberate hesitation, mimicking the tone of a defeated, desperate woman. Marcus, you win. I cannot lose my license. I am ready to sign the settlement agreement and forfeit the estate. Set up a mediation at your office tomorrow. I hit send. The response arrived less than 3 minutes later. The speed indicated they had been sitting around their phones, eagerly waiting for my capitulation. Marcus replied with a location, a time, and a thinly veiled taunt. Conference room A. 10 in the morning. Bring a valid ID. We will have the release forms ready. Glad you finally saw reason. I tossed the phone onto the cushion. I gathered the financial printouts, placing them carefully into a sleek leather portfolio. I was not walking into that law firm to negotiate a settlement. I was walking into that law firm to light a match. They wanted to steal my inheritance and destroy my career. I was going to let them sit across from me, smiling and victorious, right up until the moment I revealed the trapdoor hidden beneath their feet. The Manhattan skyline loomed behind the floor-to-ceiling glass windows of Hayes and Partners. Marcus operated out of a corner suite on the 50th floor, a space designed to intimidate. The mahogany table was long enough to seat 20, polished to a mirror finish. When I walked into Conference Room A at exactly 10 in the morning, the Sterling family had already arranged themselves like a royal court, awaiting a peasant's surrender. Vivian sat near the head of the table, draped in an emerald silk dress. She sipped sparkling water, radiating the smug satisfaction of a society matriarch who had successfully disciplined a disobedient child. Richard occupied the chair beside her, checking his expensive gold watch with practiced impatience. Chloe was positioned near the corner, holding her phone at a slight angle. The red recording light was faintly visible. She was live streaming, or at least recording the interaction, for her thousands of followers ready to document my humiliating defeat to bolster her victim narrative. Marcus stood at the head of the table, projecting ultimate authority. He wore a navy bespoke suit, tapping a silver Mont Blanc pen against a thick stack of legal documents. He gestured for me to take the single chair positioned on the opposite side, isolated and exposed. "Have a seat," Clara Marcus instructed, his tone dripping with professional condescension. "Let us get this over with quickly. I have a merger closing at noon." I took the seat. I kept my shoulders slightly slumped, casting my eyes downward. I needed them to believe the suspension had broken my resolve. I placed my plain leather portfolio on the table, keeping my hands visibly clasped to simulate anxiety. Richard did not waste time with pleasantries. He tossed a single sheet of paper across the expanse of the table. It slid to a halt right in front of me. "There is your buyout. Richard stated, leaning back and crossing his arms. $100,000. In exchange, you sign the waiver renouncing any claim to the Hamptons estate, and you officially withdraw the fraudulent will you submitted to the probate court. I stared at the paper. $100,000. They were offering me a fraction of the $4.2 million property, tossing me a bone to ensure I walked away quietly. And the ethics complaint I asked, letting a slight tremor enter my voice. The suspension. Vivian smiled a cold, predatory curve of her lips. Sign the waiver, Clara. Once the estate is secured and the sale is finalized, your father will make a call. The complaint will be withdrawn due to lack of evidence. You can have your little calculator job back. It was textbook coercion, delivered with staggering arrogance. They felt entirely untouchable within the walls of a premier law firm. Marcus slid a much thicker document toward me, pointing to the bottom of the last page. This is the non-disclosure and forfeiture agreement. It stipulates that you will not discuss the estate, the will, or this settlement with anyone. I am acting as the primary drafting attorney and official witness to your signature. I picked up the heavy silver pen Marcus had provided. I let my hand shake just enough for Chloe's camera to capture the supposed devastation of my defeat. I hovered the nib over the signature line, hovering just millimeters above the crisp white paper. The room held its collective breath, anticipating the final victory. I stopped. I did not sign. I lowered the pen and slowly raised my head. The slumped posture vanished. The simulated anxiety evaporated, replaced by the chilling clinical focus of a forensic investigator who had just cornered her mark. I locked eyes with my brother-in-law. Marcus, I said, my voice dropping the tremor, entirely adopting a sharp, resonant clarity. As the drafting attorney of this document and the primary legal counsel for Aura Blanc Cosmetics, are you absolutely certain you want to append your signature as a witness to an active embezzlement scheme? The silence hit the room like a physical blow. Marcus froze. The smug, commanding lawyer vanished, his brow furrowed in sudden, sharp confusion. "Excuse me," he snapped, attempting to maintain control. "What are you talking about?" Chloe lowered her phone, the recording forgotten. "Clara signed the damn paper and stopped playing games," she hissed. I ignored her, keeping my gaze fixed entirely on Marcus. He was the weakest link in their criminal chain because he actually had a career to lose. I am talking about the $3.5 million your father-in-law quietly siphoned from William Sterling's retirement accounts over the last 36 months, I stated, enunciating every syllable. I am talking about the Nevada shell companies Richard set up to funnel that stolen money into your wife's failing cosmetics brand under the guise of venture capital. Richard slammed his hand on the table, his face turning an alarming shade of purple. "Shut your mouth! You are making insane accusations." I unzipped my leather portfolio. I pulled out the thick stack of financial printouts I had secured right before my suspension. I tossed them across the polished mahogany, the papers fanned out displaying highlighted routing numbers, wire transfer receipts, and the incorporation documents of the anonymous LLCs. "You structured the legal framework for Aura Blanc, Marcus." I continued, my voice slicing through Richard's bluster. "You filed the tax returns. When the IRS traces those fake investments back to a dead man's stolen retirement fund, they are not going to look at Richard first. They are going to look at the corporate attorney who facilitated the money laundering." Marcus stared at the documents scattered across the table. His eyes darted across the highlighted routing numbers. The realization hit him with the force of a freight train. He had married into a wealthy family, believing they were funding Chloe's business with legitimate cash. He had no idea his father-in-law was using him to wash stolen trust funds. "What is this?" Marcus whispered, his voice stripped of all arrogance. He grabbed a wire transfer receipt, his legal mind quickly connecting the devastating dots. "Richard, where did this capital originate?" Richard stumbled over his words, the aggressive patriarch suddenly scrambling for an excuse. "It is legitimate investment capital. She is fabricating those numbers. Do not listen to her, Marcus." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table. "They need the $4 million from the Hamptons house sale to replace the money they stole before the probate court audits the estate," I explained calmly. "That is why they are so desperate to force my signature today. If I take the inheritance, the audit happens, and the missing millions are discovered. If they sell the house, they balance the ledger, and no one is the wiser." Vivian stood up, her emerald silk dress rustling sharply. "This mediation is over. Marcus, tear up the agreement. We are leaving." "No one is leaving." Marcus barked, his voice vibrating with genuine panic. He glared at his mother-in-law, then turned a furious gaze toward his wife. "Chloe, did you know about this? Did you know where the funding was coming from?" Chloe shrank back against the wall, clutching her phone to her chest. I just needed capital for the product launch. Daddy said he handled it." Marcus dropped the paper. He backed away from the table as if the documents were radioactive. He was a smart man. He knew that participating in this settlement now would make him an active co-conspirator in an ongoing fraud covering up the theft of an estate. His pristine legal career, his Manhattan corner office, everything he had built was suddenly standing on the edge of a federal indictment. The alliance had cracked wide open. The trap was sprung. But exposing the crime was only the first phase. I needed to twist the knife until their entire operation bled out. The initial shock of the shell company documents paralyzed the room. Marcus stared at the wire transfers, his sharp legal mind racing through the implications. But the shell companies were only the domestic layer of the operation. The true depth of my parents' financial depravity was buried much deeper. It was time to show them exactly how thorough a forensic accountant could be. I reached back into my portfolio and withdrew a second, much thicker bundle of documents. I dropped it heavily onto the mahogany table. The dull thud echoed like a gavel striking wood. "Those are the domestic LLCs," I said, pointing to the first scattered pile. "This new stack is the offshore routing." Marcus stepped forward, his eyes locking onto the top page of the new bundle. Richard lunged to grab the papers, but Marcus intercepted him, snatching the document away. The son-in-law was no longer playing defense for the Sterling family. He was desperately trying to assess his own exposure. I watched Marcus read the header. The document bore the distinct formatting of a Cayman Islands banking ledger. For the past 5 years, I explained keeping my voice clinical and detached. Richard and Vivian systematically drained William Sterling's primary retirement accounts, $3.5 million. They did not just wire it directly to Delaware. They layered the transactions through 2 offshore holding companies in the Caymans to obscure the origin. Vivian's emerald dress seemed to lose its luster. She sank slowly into her chair, her manicured hands gripping the armrests. Once the funds were offshore, I continued tracking the flow of the invisible money. They repatriated the cash by creating fictitious international vendor invoices for Aura Blanc Cosmetics. Chloe's company reported massive operating losses domestically, but those fake invoices allowed the stolen trust funds to be washed clean and integrated back into the U.S. banking system as legitimate business revenue. I tapped my index finger against the glass surface of the table. "You are not fighting me because you want the $4 million from the Hamptons estate," I stated, staring directly into Richard's panicked eyes. "You are terrified because if I am recognized as the sole beneficiary, I gain the immediate legal standing to demand a comprehensive court-mandated audit of the entire estate." Richard opened his mouth to speak, but no sound emerged. The blustering patriarch who threatened to destroy my career an hour ago was now a cornered animal, realizing the trap had permanently locked. "Once a probate judge sees these ledgers," I said, driving the final nail into their defense, "the IRS Criminal Investigation Division gets involved. You are looking at a minimum of 10 years in federal prison for tax evasion, wire fraud, and the financial exploitation of an elder." The air in the conference room thickened, turning freezing cold. The reality of a federal indictment is not something wealthy Manhattanites can yell their way out of. It is a slow, crushing administrative death, and they were staring right at it. Chloe dropped her phone. The device clattered loudly against the floor. The live stream she had intended to use to humiliate me was forgotten. She stumbled forward, grabbing Marcus by the sleeve of his tailored suit. "Marcus, tell her to stop. Tell her she cannot use those papers. They are stolen or something. Claim they are inadmissible." Marcus ripped his arm away from his wife. The disgust on his face was palpable. "Admissibility does not matter right now, Chloe. If she hands this file to the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, they will subpoena the original bank records themselves. The paper trail is already established." He turned his furious gaze toward Richard. "Did you really think you could run a Cayman washing operation through my law firm and not get caught? I am the registered agent for Aura Blanc. My signature is on the compliance filings. You just tied me to a federal felony. I did what I had to do to protect the family," Richard roared, slamming his fist against the table in a futile display of dominance. "William's medical care was draining us. Chloe's brand needed capital to scale. I managed the assets. I made the hard choices. You stole from a dying man to fund lip gloss," I countered sharply. "Do not dress up embezzlement as a noble sacrifice." Vivian tried to intervene, attempting to deploy her usual aristocratic manipulation. "Clara, darling, please. We are family. If this gets out, the scandal will ruin all of us. You will be dragged through the mud right alongside us." I leaned back in my chair, entirely unbothered by her desperate plea. "I have lived in the mud for 10 years, Vivian. You put me there when I was 18. I survived. You, on the other hand, will not last a week in a federal penitentiary." I checked my watch. The time for negotiation had expired. I stood up, smoothing the front of my jacket. I gathered the original settlement offer, the insulting $100,000 buyout, and tore it precisely in half, dropping the pieces onto the table. "I am giving you 24 hours, I announced, addressing Richard and Vivian. "You will contact the listing agent and halt the sale of the Hamptons property. You will vacate the premises and hand the keys to my legal counsel. You will formally withdraw the ethics complaint against my CPA license." Richard gritted his teeth, his pride fighting a losing battle against his fear. "And if we do all that, you bury the Cayman files." I offered a cold, humorless smile. "I am a forensic accountant, Richard. I do not bury evidence. But if you comply within 24 hours, I will delay submitting this dossier to the FBI. That will give you enough time to hire a very good criminal defense attorney before the raid happens." I picked up my empty leather portfolio and walked toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. I did not look back. I knew Marcus was already calculating how to sever his ties to the Sterling family, and I knew Chloe was about to unleash a hysterical breakdown. I stepped onto the elevator, watching the numbers descend toward the lobby. I had outmaneuvered their legal threats and shattered their financial facade. But I knew the Sterling family dynamics too well. A narcissist stripped of their power does not surrender gracefully. They lash out with whatever weapon they have left. As I walked out of the high-rise and onto the bustling Manhattan street, I braced myself. Richard and Vivian were legally cornered, but Chloe still held the one tool I could not control with a spreadsheet, the court of public opinion, and she was about to use it to wage a very dirty, very public war. Marcus Hayes did not inherit his corner office. He fought for it. As an African-American man navigating the notoriously insular, blue blood-dominated arena of Manhattan corporate law, he had to be flawless. He spent 2 decades building an unassailable reputation, securing multiple advanced degrees, and clawing his way up from a working-class neighborhood in Brooklyn to become a senior partner at a premier firm. His signature on a document carried the weight of absolute integrity. And in the span of 3 minutes staring at the offshore banking ledgers scattered across the mahogany table, Marcus realized his pristine signature was currently anchoring a multi-million-dollar federal money-laundering operation. The air in Conference Room A grew thick and suffocating. Marcus picked up a wire transfer receipt, his eyes tracking the flow of stolen trust funds from the Cayman Islands straight into the Delaware Limited Liability Company he had personally registered for his wife. He had married into the Sterling family believing they represented the pinnacle of generational wealth and business acumen. They had welcomed him with open arms, praising his legal brilliance. He now understood they had not welcomed a son-in-law. They had recruited a human shield. Marcus dropped the paper. He reached out and backhanded his crystal water glass off the table. The glass hit the hardwood floor, shattering with a sharp, violent crack that severed the tension in the room. Vivian flinched, pulling her emerald silk dress away from the splash zone. Richard stumbled backward. Marcus turned his furious, piercing gaze toward Chloe. "Did you know he demanded, his voice low and vibrating with a dangerous intensity?" Chloe pressed her back against the glass wall of the conference room. The confident, sneering socialite who had tried to livestream my downfall just 10 minutes ago was gone. She clutched her phone to her chest, her eyes darting frantically between her husband and her parents. "I just needed funding," Chloe stammered, her voice pitching into a desperate whine. "The vendors were threatening to drop my product line. Daddy said he had a private investor network. I did not ask where the money came from. You know I do not handle the accounting, Marcus." Marcus stepped closer to her, his towering frame casting a long shadow over the golden child of the Sterling family. "You signed the corporate tax returns, Chloe. You reported millions in fake revenue to offset the losses of your vanity project. You used my firm to legitimize stolen cash." Richard stepped forward, raising his hands in a frantic, pacifying gesture. He tried to project the calm, commanding presence of an elder statesman guiding a junior associate. "Marcus, son, let us keep our heads here," Richard pleaded, forcing a strained smile. "We kept you insulated. I structured the offshore entities myself. You have plausible deniability. We can manage this exposure if we just stay united." Plausible deniability. Marcus spat the words out as if they were poison. He turned his wrath onto his father-in-law. "Do you have any idea how the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network operates, Richard? When the federal investigators run a trace on those Cayman routing numbers, the algorithms will flag the registered agent of the receiving company. That is my name. You did not insulate me. You used my unblemished career to launder money stolen from a dying man." The polished veneer of the Sterling family was disintegrating right in front of my eyes. For 10 years they had projected an image of untouchable unity. They had banished me to protect their flawless reputation. Now faced with the very real threat of prison time, their loyalty evaporated. Toxicity does not breed allegiance. It only breeds parasites, and the parasites were beginning to feed on each other. Vivian could not tolerate watching her husband being reprimanded by someone she secretly considered an outsider. The refined society matron dropped her mask entirely. She slammed her hands down on the armrests of her chair and stood up, her face flushed with aristocratic fury. "How dare you speak to Richard that way?" Vivian shrieked, pointing a manicured finger at Marcus. "We brought you into this family. We gave you access to country clubs and social networks you never would have seen on your own. We elevated your standing in this city. You are an ungrateful man throwing a tantrum over an accounting discrepancy." Marcus let out a harsh, grating laugh. He looked at his mother-in-law, the sheer disgust radiating from his posture. "An ungrateful man," Marcus repeated, shaking his head. He looked at the three of them, finally seeing the ugly, rotting core beneath their designer clothes. "You brought me into this family because my track record legitimized your daughter's fraudulent business. You needed a self-made lawyer with a spotless background to sign the compliance forms, so you could play the role of wealthy benefactors without drawing suspicion. You used my race, my background, and my reputation to camouflage your theft. Marcus, please stop." Chloe begged, tears spilling over her mascara. "We are a family. We can fix this together. We just need to get the money from the Hamptons house and replace what we took from the trust." Marcus stared at his wife. The affection he once held for her was entirely gone, replaced by the cold, calculating detachment of a man planning his legal defense. "There is no fixing this, Chloe," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a terrifying calm. "You are holding a lit match inside a powder keg. I am not burning my life down to keep you warm." He turned his back on her, pacing toward the far end of the room, pulling his phone from his pocket. He was already drafting his exit strategy. A smart corporate lawyer knows when to cut his losses, and Marcus was preparing to sever his ties to the Sterling family with surgical precision. I remained seated in my solitary chair, watching the carnage unfold. I did not need to raise my voice. I did not need to hurl insults or demand apologies for the decade of misery they had inflicted upon me. The sheer weight of their own greed was suffocating them. The golden child was weeping against the wall, abandoned by her husband. The arrogant patriarch was sweating through his bespoke shirt, realizing his financial manipulation had trapped him. The vicious matriarch was grasping at the fading threads of her social superiority. I let the heavy, miserable silence settle over the room. I allowed them to marinate in the reality of their destruction. Then I slowly reached across the mahogany table and began gathering my documents. The quiet rustle of the paper drew their attention back to the true threat in the room. Richard watched me slide the offshore banking ledgers into my leather portfolio. His shoulders slumped. He looked like a man standing on the gallows waiting for the lever to be pulled. I closed the portfolio and stood up. I smoothed the front of my jacket, projecting an aura of absolute control. I looked at my parents, offering a cold, deliberate smile that mirrored the exact expression Vivian had given me the night she threw me out of her house. I am giving you 24 hours to clear your personal belongings out of my house in the Hamptons, I announced, ensuring every word landed with the heavy impact of a judge's gavel. You will vacate the premises, and you will leave the keys on the kitchen counter. Vivian opened her mouth to argue, her pride still fighting a losing battle against her survival instinct. Clara, you cannot just kick us out into the street. If that property is not vacant by tomorrow morning, I continued, cutting her off effortlessly. This entire file will be sitting on a desk at the Federal Bureau of Investigation before noon. You will not have time to pack your designer clothes before the federal agents freeze your remaining domestic accounts. I picked up my portfolio and turned toward the heavy glass doors of the conference room. I did not wait for an answer. I did not need one. I walked out of the suite, my heels clicking sharply against the marble floor of the reception area. The air outside the conference room felt clean and breathable. I pressed the button for the elevator, watching the digital numbers descend. I had crippled their financial leverage and shattered their family alliance. Marcus would inevitably file for divorce to save his own skin, and Richard would spend his remaining funds trying to avoid an indictment. But as the elevator doors chimed and slid open, my analytical mind began running through the remaining variables. I had cornered them legally and financially, but a desperate narcissist rarely concedes total defeat without dragging their opponent through the mud. Chloe had lost her husband, her funding, and her business model in a single afternoon. She possessed neither the intelligence to fight a legal battle nor the humility to walk away. Chloe only understood one currency: attention. I stepped into the elevator car, watching the doors slide shut, sealing off the 50-floor view of the Manhattan skyline. My parents were broken, but my sister was a wounded animal. And a wounded animal with a smartphone and 1 million online followers was about to launch a very dirty, very public retaliation. The 24-hour deadline was nearing its end. I sat in my apartment monitoring the quiet ticking of the wall clock. The silence from the Sterling camp was expected. They were cornered, bleeding out financially and legally. I anticipated a final desperate settlement offer, or perhaps a frantic call from a criminal defense attorney begging for an extension. I did not anticipate the weapon they actually chose. My personal phone began to vibrate against the kitchen counter. It buzzed once, then twice. Then the notifications escalated into a continuous, aggressive hum. The screen lit up with a barrage of text messages from old college roommates, distant cousins, and former colleagues I had not spoken to in years. I unlocked the screen. The first message was from an old friend who worked in public relations. Clara, are you seeing this online right now? You need to lock down your accounts immediately. She included a link. I tapped the blue text. The screen transitioned to a prominent social media platform, opening a video that already displayed over 2.5 million views. It was Chloe. She was sitting in what looked like the dimly lit corner of her Tribeca penthouse. She wore no makeup. Her usually immaculate hair was pulled into a messy knot. She was dressed in an oversized faded sweater, projecting an image of raw, unfiltered vulnerability. She stared directly into the camera, tears streaming down her pale cheeks, her breath hitching in a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I do not usually share personal family matters on here, Chloe began, her voice quivering with manufactured trauma. But I need to speak out before she destroys my family completely. I watched my expression hardening as my sister deployed the nuclear option of modern warfare, the court of public opinion. Chloe looked down at her hands, wiping away a tear. Many of you know my sister Clara has been estranged from our family for a decade. What you do not know is why. We tried to protect her privacy. We tried to get her help. But she has struggled with severe addiction and mental instability for years. I felt a cold knot form in my stomach. She was laying the groundwork establishing a narrative that framed me not as a competent forensic accountant, but as a dangerous, unstable addict. It was a brilliant, malicious strategy designed to instantly discredit any evidence I might present to the authorities. Who believes financial documents provided by a vengeful junkie? Yesterday, Clara showed up at my grandfather's funeral. Chloe continued staring into the lens with wide, terrified eyes. She presented a forged, fraudulent will. She is demanding we hand over my grandfather's estate, threatening to destroy my cosmetics brand with fabricated tax documents if we do not pay her off. She is trying to extort my parents while they are grieving. I am terrified for my safety. Please, if you see her, do not engage. We just want our family to heal. The video cut to black. I scrolled down to the comment section. It was a digital bloodbath. Thousands of strangers mobilized by Chloe's tearful performance were hunting me down. The comments were ruthless, violent, and highly coordinated. Lock that greedy junkie up. Imagine extorting your own family at a funeral. She belongs in a cell. Find out where she works and get her fired. Cancel her. My professional profile on a major networking site had already been targeted. The digital mob had located my employer. They were flooding the firm's page with thousands of negative reviews demanding my immediate termination. They were posting my office address. They were tagging the state accounting board demanding the revocation of my CPA license. The Sterling family was using weaponized empathy to execute a digital lynching. The phone on my desk rang. The caller ID displayed the main switchboard for my accounting firm. I answered. "Clara, it is David." The managing partner's voice was tight, bordering on outright panic. "I have seen the video, David," I stated, keeping my tone level. "It is a fabricated smear campaign. I am pursuing legal action for defamation." David let out a harsh, stressed breath. "Legal action takes months. We are hemorrhaging clients right now." 4 major accounts called in the last hour, demanding to know why we employ someone accused of elder abuse and extortion. Our corporate communications team is overwhelmed. The building security had to escort protesters away from the lobby. He paused, the heavy silence indicating the impending blow. "The suspension is no longer indefinite, Clara. I am sorry, but the firm cannot weather this kind of public relations crisis. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. Human Resources will courier your final paperwork and personal effects by the end of the day." The line went dead. I lowered the phone. I had survived being kicked out of my home at 18. I had built a career analyzing complex financial crimes. In the span of 30 minutes, Chloe had effectively obliterated my professional reputation, using nothing but a ring light and fake tears. My cell phone buzzed again. This time it was a direct call from an unsaved number. I answered, pressing the phone to my ear. "Hello, Clara." Vivian's voice drifted through the speaker. She sounded relaxed, triumphant, sipping what was likely an expensive glass of wine. The contrast between her smug demeanor and the chaos she had just unleashed upon my life was sickening. "You seem quiet, darling," Vivian purred. "Having a difficult morning. You are weaponizing a false narrative to cover up federal tax evasion." "Mother," I replied, my voice chillingly calm, "you think a viral video changes the routing numbers on a Cayman Islands ledger?" Vivian laughed, a short, dismissive sound. "The law is a very slow, very tedious machine, Clara. It requires hearings and evidence and due process. The court of public opinion, however, executes its sentence immediately." She paused, ensuring her next words carried the full weight of her malice. "You are currently unemployed, publicly disgraced, and universally despised. No reputable financial institution will hire a whistleblower who has been branded an unstable extortionist. If you hand those documents to the FBI, now defense attorneys will use Chloe's video to paint you as a bitter, vindictive liar executing a vendetta. They will tear your credibility to shreds on the witness stand." I walked over to the window of my apartment, looking down at the busy street below. The physical world continued to move entirely unaware of the digital assassination that had just occurred. "You have nothing left to fight with," Clara Vivian declared softly. "So here is the new arrangement. You will log online and post a public apology admitting the video is true. You will state that you are seeking treatment. You will sign the waiver relinquishing the Hamptons property. If you do that, Chloe might post a follow-up video asking her followers to show you mercy. I stared at the reflection of my own face in the window glass. I did not see fear. I did not see the broken girl they were trying to create. I saw a professional investigator analyzing a shift in the battlefield. They thought they had won by changing the rules of engagement. They believed that moving the fight from a corporate boardroom to a social media platform gave them an insurmountable advantage. They assumed that facing a digital mob would break my psychological endurance and force me to beg for a truce. I understand your position, Vivian, I said. I will take your offer under consideration. I ended the call before she could revel in her perceived victory. I stepped away from the window and walked back toward the coffee table where the offshore banking files still rested. A lesser person would have cracked under the overwhelming pressure of a public shaming. They would have logged online desperately trying to defend themselves against a swarm of faceless attackers getting dragged deeper into the mud. I was not going to play defense on their chosen battlefield. I was going to use their aggressive media strategy to guarantee their absolute destruction. Vivian was right about one thing. A viral video could severely damage a witness's credibility in front of a jury. But that logic only applied if the core evidence relied solely on my testimony. I did not need to testify to prove they stole millions. I just needed to prove the original foundation of their power was built on a lie. I pulled a heavily encrypted hard drive from my desk drawer. The family wanted to escalate the conflict to the highest possible stakes. They wanted a public spectacle. I was about to introduce them to an expert who specialized in a very specific, undeniable form of truth, a truth that could not be manipulated by tears or social media followers or expensive corporate lawyers. The Sterling family thought they had buried me under an avalanche of lies. They were about to discover that I was incredibly skilled at digging up graves. The digital onslaught intensified over the next 48 hours. My inbox flooded with hateful messages. My voicemail reached maximum capacity, choked with threats from strangers defending a woman they had never met. Chloe capitalized on the momentum, booking a prime-time slot on a popular syndicated morning show. She sat on a plush white sofa across from a sympathetic host, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, recounting the fabricated trauma of my supposed addiction. She portrayed Richard and Vivian as heartbroken martyrs, desperate to save their wayward daughter from herself. My response was absolute silence. I deactivated my social media profiles. I powered down my personal cell phone. I ignored the frantic emails from tabloid journalists looking for a counterstatement. The Sterling family interpreted my silence as surrender. They believed the sheer volume of public hatred had driven me into hiding, terrified to show my face. They were wrong. I was not hiding. I was operating in the shadows, executing a precise tactical maneuver that required absolute discretion. While Chloe wept on national television, I sat in a sterile, brightly lit laboratory in Midtown Manhattan, watching a man examine a piece of paper through a high-powered stereo microscope. Dr. Elias Vance was a board-certified forensic document examiner. He had testified as an expert witness in over 200 federal trials, unmasking counterfeit art rings and dismantling high-level corporate fraud. His meticulous analysis could sink a Fortune 500 company or send a billionaire to prison. I had secured his services using a portion of the emergency funds I kept entirely separate from my main banking accounts. I did not bring him the offshore ledgers or the shell company registrations. I brought him something far more fundamental. The battle over the offshore accounts and the money laundering scheme would inevitably drag into a protracted federal investigation. Defense attorneys would tie up the discovery phase for years, arguing over jurisdiction and wire transfer protocols. I needed a weapon that could decapitate the Sterling family hierarchy immediately within the confines of the New York State Surrogate Court. I needed to invalidate the very foundation of their power, the 2019 will. Dr. Vance adjusted the focus knob on his microscope, illuminating the signature line on the document Richard had submitted to the probate court. He compared it against a stack of verified exemplars I had provided, checks, old birthday cards, and letters William had written to me over the last decade. William Sterling was a man of intense methodical habits. Before he amassed his wealth in real estate, he spent his 20s working as a master horologist, repairing intricate luxury timepieces. He spent countless hours peering through loops, manipulating microscopic gears with tweezers. That precise mechanical training permanently altered his motor function. "Did you notice the baseline alignment?" I asked, leaning forward as Vance traced the ink strokes on the monitor. Vance nodded, his eyes never leaving the screen. "It is highly atypical." The decedent anchored his wrist firmly, likely a remnant of his horological work. He initiated the downstroke of the capital W at a severe, unnatural 45-degree angle. It requires a rigid pivot from the forearm, not the fingers. He switched the display to show the signature from the 2019 will side by side with an authentic exemplar from a 2018 bank draft. The forgery on the 2019 document is quite sophisticated. Vance noted, his tone entirely clinical. The loop structures and terminal strokes mimic the visual appearance of William Sterling's handwriting almost perfectly. To a layman or a standard bank teller, this passes inspection. He leaned back, tapping a stylus against the edge of the monitor. However, the forger lacked the mechanical muscle memory of the decedent. The ink deposition on the 2019 document indicates a fluid sweeping motion driven by the wrist and fingers. The pen pressure is uniform. In the authentic exemplars, the pen pressure spikes violently at the apex of the W and the S because William Sterling was fighting his own rigid joints to execute the curve. He turned his chair to face me, pushing his glasses up the bridge of his nose. "The 2019 will is a forgery, Clara. It is a simulation. A very good one, but a simulation nonetheless. I can state with absolute forensic certainty that William Sterling did not sign this document." A surge of cold, razor-sharp satisfaction traveled down my spine. The money laundering, the offshore accounts, the fake cosmetics brand. Every single piece of their criminal enterprise was tethered to their control of the estate, and their control of the estate was anchored entirely by a forged piece of paper. If I presented the Cayman Islands ledgers to the surrogate court, Richard would argue the funds were legitimate investments. If I argued about Chloe's fake company, Vivian would scream harassment. But a forged will, that was a definitive, unarguable felony. "Will you swear to that analysis in a sworn affidavit?" I asked, meeting Vance's gaze. "I will swear to it under penalty of perjury, and I will defend the methodology on the witness stand against any defense expert they attempt to hire," Vance replied firmly. I thanked him, collected the sealed forensic report, and left the laboratory. The crisp autumn air of Manhattan hit my face as I stepped onto the sidewalk. The city buzzed with oblivious energy. Chloe was likely wrapping up another television interview, basking in the sympathetic glow of a manufactured tragedy. Richard and Vivian were probably finalizing the escrow paperwork for the Hamptons estate, confident they had successfully neutralized the rogue daughter. They were pushing their chips into the center of the table, entirely unaware that I held the only winning hand. I walked toward the subway station, clutching my briefcase. The Sterling family had escalated a private dispute into a national media spectacle. They chose to fight in the blinding light of public attention. They believed the glare would blind me. They failed to realize that bringing a massive audience to a magic show only makes the inevitable reveal that much more devastating. By aggressively publicizing the narrative of my supposed extortion, Chloe ensured that every major media outlet in New York was currently tracking the probate battle. They had invited the press to witness my execution. I was going to use those same cameras to broadcast their absolute destruction. I pulled a burner phone from my coat pocket. I dialed the direct line for the managing partner of the law firm representing me in the surrogate court. The attorney answered on the first ring, his voice tense. "Clara, the press is swarming the courthouse. Chloe's media team just released a statement claiming you are refusing to drop the fraudulent filing. Richard's lawyers filed a motion to dismiss your claim with prejudice, citing lack of standing and demanding immediate sanctions against you. The hearing is set for tomorrow morning." "Excellent," I replied, my voice steady and resonant. "Let them pack the courtroom." The lawyer hesitated. "Clara, If we walk into that hearing and the judge buys their narrative, you will be hit with massive financial penalties. You could face criminal charges for filing a false instrument. We are walking into an ambush. We are not walking into an ambush, I corrected him. A dark, terrible smile touching my lips. We are closing the vault. I am sending a courier to your office right now with a sealed forensic report. Review it tonight. I will see you in court tomorrow morning. I ended the call and tossed the burner phone into a nearby trash receptacle. The battle lines were drawn. The audience was seated. The Sterling family expected a grieving, defeated addict to grovel for mercy before a stern judge. They were about to encounter a forensic accountant armed with a scalpel ready to dissect their entire existence on the public record. The morning of the hearing, the granite steps of the Manhattan Surrogate Court looked like the red carpet at a disastrous film premiere. Chloe had mobilized her entire public relations apparatus. Reporters from local news affiliates and gossip blogs jostled for position behind the velvet ropes, their camera lenses reflecting the overcast sky. When the black town car carrying the Sterling family pulled up to the curb, a flurry of flashes erupted. Richard stepped out first, projecting the image of a weary, embattled patriarch defending his family against a predatory outsider. Vivian clutched his arm, wearing a tailored navy suit that screamed quiet suffering. Chloe followed, hiding behind oversized sunglasses, pressing a tissue to her nose, while ignoring the shouted questions from the press. Marcus walked slightly behind them, his face an unreadable mask. I arrived 10 minutes later in a standard yellow taxi. I wore no sunglasses. I carried no tissues. I walked past the screaming reporters with my head held high, holding a simple leather briefcase. I ignored the barrage of questions regarding my supposed addiction and extortion attempts. I did not need to win the debate on the sidewalk. I only needed to win the debate inside the courtroom. The courtroom was packed. The heavy oak benches were filled with curious onlookers, court reporters, and junior associates from Marcus's law firm who had come to watch the spectacle. The air was thick with the distinct scent of polished wood and impending conflict. Richard and his legal team occupied the plaintiff's table. He had spared no expense. He hired a trio of high-powered litigators from a white shoe firm, men who billed thousands of dollars an hour to aggressively dismantle opposing counsel. They sat behind towering stacks of case law binders, whispering confidently to each other. I took my seat at the defense table. My attorney, a sharp, pragmatic litigator named Harrison Vance, sat beside me. He opened a slim folder containing only 2 documents. We did not need towering stacks of case law. Truth is incredibly efficient. The Honorable Judge Evelyn Caldwell entered the courtroom. She was a formidable woman known for her zero-tolerance policy regarding courtroom theatrics. The bailiff called the room to order, and the low hum of chatter ceased instantly. Your Honor, the lead attorney for the Sterling family, began standing up and buttoning his expensive jacket. We are here today to request the immediate dismissal of the fraudulent document presented by Clara Sterling. Furthermore, we are requesting sanctions for filing a false instrument and a permanent injunction barring her from interfering with the legitimate execution of the 2019 will. Judge Caldwell adjusted her glasses, looking down at the paperwork before her. Counselor, you are alleging that the document presented by the defense dated 7 days prior to the decedent's passing is invalid. On what specific grounds? The attorney puffed out his chest, projecting his voice to ensure the reporters in the back row heard every word. Lack of testamentary capacity. Your Honor, the decedent William Sterling was 89 years old and suffering from advanced cognitive decline. He was highly susceptible to undue influence. We contend that Clara Sterling, an estranged family member with a documented history of instability, manipulated a vulnerable senior citizen into signing a document he did not understand. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Chloe dabbed her eyes, playing her role perfectly. Vivian nodded in solemn agreement. They were executing their smear campaign on the public record, attempting to leverage Chloe's viral video narrative inside a court of law. Judge Caldwell turned her stern gaze toward my table. Mr. Vance, does the defense have a response to these allegations of cognitive decline and undue influence? Harrison Vance stood up slowly. He did not raise his voice. He did not match the aggressive posturing of the opposing counsel. He simply picked up the first piece of paper from our folder. "We do, Your Honor," Vance stated calmly. The plaintiffs allege the decedent lacked testamentary capacity. However, the decedent was well aware of his family's litigious nature. He anticipated this exact challenge. Vance handed a copy of the document to the bailiff, who delivered it to the judge. "We submit into evidence a comprehensive neurological evaluation conducted by Dr. Eris Thorne, the chief of neurology at Mount Sinai Hospital." Vance continued, "This evaluation was performed exactly 48 hours prior to the execution of the new will. Dr. Thorne certifies under penalty of perjury that William Sterling possessed absolute cognitive clarity, demonstrated no signs of dementia, and explicitly articulated his intention to disinherit his son, Richard Sterling." The arrogant smirk vanished from the lead opposing attorney's face. He leaned over urgently, whispering to his junior associates. Richard's posture stiffened. Judge Caldwell scanned the medical report, her expression unreadable. "This is a highly definitive medical assessment, counselor. It severely undermines your claim of cognitive decline." The opposing attorney scrambled to recover. "Your Honor, even if the decedent was briefly lucid, we maintain that the 2019 will remains the primary legally binding document governing the estate. The timing of this new will is highly suspicious, and we request a full discovery period to depose the witnesses." Vance did not sit down. He picked up the second document from our folder. "Your Honor, entering a discovery period to validate the 2019 will would be a waste of the court's time," Vance stated, his voice echoing cleanly through the silent courtroom, "because the 2019 will is a forgery." The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled frantically on their notepads. Observers gasped. The bailiff shouted for order as Judge Caldwell banged her gavel sharply against the sounding block. "Order in this court!" Judge Caldwell barked, glaring at the gallery, until absolute silence returned. "Mr. Vance, that is a staggering accusation. You better have irrefutable proof to support it. We submit into evidence a forensic analysis report prepared by Dr. Elias Vance, a board-certified forensic document examiner," my attorney announced, handing the heavy-sealed report to the bailiff. I watched Richard's face as the bailiff walked the report up to the bench. The color drained from his cheeks. His eyes darted toward the exit doors. He knew exactly what that report contained. Dr. Vance conducted a microscopic ink and structural analysis of the signature on the 2019 will, Harrison Vance explained, ensuring his voice carried to every corner of the room. The analysis concludes with absolute forensic certainty that the signature is a simulation. William Sterling did not sign the 2019 will. The document submitted to this court by Richard Sterling is fraudulent. Vivian gasped aloud, her hand flying to her chest. Chloe froze her tissue suspended midair. The polished, untouchable Sterling family facade cracked wide open in front of the New York press corps. The lead attorney for the Sterling family stared at the forensic report, his jaw slack. He had billed them thousands of dollars an hour, entirely unaware his clients had handed him a forged document. He stepped back from the podium, physically distancing himself from Richard. In the legal profession, knowingly submitting a forged document to a judge is a career-ending offense. The expensive litigator realized he had just been tricked into participating in a felony. Judge Caldwell spent 3 agonizing minutes reading the forensic report. The silence in the courtroom was oppressive. When she finally looked up, her gaze was fixed entirely on Richard Sterling. "Mr. Sterling." Judge Caldwell said, her voice dropping to a dangerous icy register. "This court does not take allegations of forgery lightly. Do you have any explanation for why a forensic expert has determined the primary document governing a multi-million-dollar estate is a fabrication?" Richard opened his mouth, but he had no script for this. His money and his golf course connections could not buy his way out of a microscopic ink analysis. He stammered, looking helplessly at his lead attorney, who refused to meet his eyes. I received that document from his previous lawyers," Richard croaked, his voice cracking. "I assumed it was authentic." Judge Caldwell leaned forward. "You assumed. You submitted a legal instrument to this court under oath to initiate the sale of a $4 million property based on an assumption." She slammed her gavel down. The sound cracked like a gunshot. "I am dismissing the plaintiff's motion for immediate sanctions against Clara Sterling. Judge Caldwell announced her tone, leaving no room for debate. The 2019 will is hereby suspended pending a full criminal investigation. The freeze on the estate assets remains in full effect. I am also referring this matter directly to the district attorney's office for potential charges of forgery and filing a false instrument. The courtroom exploded into chaos. The reporters bolted for the doors, desperate to be the first to break the news that the prominent Sterling family was facing a criminal forgery investigation. Richard slumped into his chair, a broken, defeated man. Vivian stared blankly ahead, realizing her social standing had just been incinerated on the public record. I remained seated at the defense table, packing my folder into my briefcase. I had won the probate battle. I had exposed the forgery and secured my inheritance. The Civil War was over, but as I stood up and looked across the aisle at my terrified family, I knew the true execution had not yet begun. They thought losing the Hamptons house and facing a local forgery charge was the worst-case scenario. They thought the nightmare was over. They had no idea that the heavy, methodical footsteps echoing down the hallway outside the courtroom belonged to a completely different branch of law enforcement. The civil judge had ruled on the will. The federal government was about to rule on the money. Judge Caldwell raised her gavel to formally adjourn the hearing. The sharp crack of wood on wood never came. The heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open. They did not creak or slide. They were pushed open with a forceful, synchronized precision that instantly silenced the murmuring gallery. 5 men and 2 women entered the aisle. They were not court personnel. They wore dark, nondescript suits and displayed identification badges hanging heavily from lanyards around their necks. Their demeanor was entirely devoid of the theatrical posturing typical of high-priced litigators. They moved with the cold, bureaucratic efficiency of the federal government. They were special agents from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. The lead agent, a tall man with close-cropped gray hair, walked directly past the frantic reporters and bypassed the wooden gate separating the gallery from the litigation tables. He did not ask for permission to approach the bench. He presented his credentials to the bailiff, who immediately stepped aside. "Your Honor." The agent addressed Judge Caldwell, his voice cutting through the stunned silence. "We apologize for the interruption. We are executing a federal arrest warrant." Richard Sterling stopped breathing. He recognized the badges. He recognized the specific agency. The realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. A local forgery charge meant hiring a clever defense attorney and negotiating a plea deal. The IRS Criminal Investigation Division meant his assets were already seized, his communications intercepted, and his conviction mathematically guaranteed. I sat quietly at my table, watching the flawless execution of the trap I had set days ago. When Chloe launched her viral smear campaign, assuming the court of public opinion would break me, she fundamentally misunderstood the battlefield. Social media outrage is loud, but it lacks subpoena power. I did not waste time arguing with internet trolls. I utilized the IRS whistleblower office. I submitted the complete dossier of the Cayman Islands routing numbers, the fake vendor invoices for Aura Blanc Cosmetics, and the shell company registrations. I provided the federal government with a meticulously mapped blueprint of a $3.5 million tax evasion and money laundering syndicate. The IRS does not operate on emotion. They operate on data. My forensic accounting package handed them an open and shut felony conviction on a silver platter. The lead agent turned his attention from the judge to the plaintiff's table. "Richard Sterling and Vivian Sterling," the agent announced, pulling a thick set of federal warrants from his jacket. "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit wire fraud, tax evasion, and money laundering under Title 18 of the United States Code." Vivian's jaw dropped. The elegant society matron who had spent decades cultivating an image of untouchable wealth let out a raw, undignified shriek. "This is a mistake," Vivian cried, gripping the edge of the table. "We are prominent citizens. You cannot just storm in here. We demand to call our lawyers." "You have the right to an attorney," the agent replied mechanically, reciting the Miranda warning as 2 other agents moved in to secure her wrists. "Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." Richard did not fight. The arrogant patriarch who had gleefully thrown his teenage daughter out into the rain and threatened to destroy my career just days prior simply collapsed inward. He allowed the federal agents to pull his arms behind his back. The sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs echoing through the courtroom sounded like the final period at the end of a very long, very painful sentence. Chloe, sitting just behind the railing, watched her parents being shackled. The reality of her situation crashed down upon her. The fake cosmetics brand, the luxurious Tribeca penthouse, the millions of online followers she had weaponized against me. None of it mattered anymore. The capital funding her entire existence was stolen, and the federal government was currently seizing every asset connected to her name. Daddy Chloe screamed, her voice cracking in genuine terror. "Do something! Call someone!" Richard kept his eyes fixed firmly on the floor. He had no one left to call. The reporters in the gallery, who had initially swarmed the courthouse, expecting to cover a scandalous family dispute over a forged will, realized they were witnessing the takedown of a massive financial crime ring. The camera shutters erupted into a blinding, continuous strobe effect. Flashbulbs illuminated Vivian's horrified face as the agents marched her down the center aisle. They captured Richard's bowed head and shackled wrists. The press, the very weapon Chloe had summoned to destroy my reputation, was now documenting the absolute humiliation of the Sterling family in real time. The viral footage of my supposed extortion attempt was instantly eclipsed by high-definition photographs of my parents being hauled away by federal agents. I watched them walk past my table. I felt no pity. I felt no triumphant joy. I felt only the cold, precise satisfaction of an unbalanced ledger finally being reconciled. They had spent my entire life manipulating the system to protect their golden child. Now the system they thought they controlled was dismantling them piece by piece. The courtroom remained in a state of chaotic frenzy. Reporters shouted questions at the retreating federal agents. The bailiff struggled to clear the aisles. Amidst the deafening noise and flashing lights, Chloe stood alone by the wooden railing, trembling uncontrollably. She looked around the room, searching desperately for a lifeline, a protector, anyone who could shield her from the impending fallout. Her frantic gaze landed on the one person who had always fixed her mistakes, the brilliant corporate lawyer who had legitimized her fraudulent business. Chloe lunged toward the heavy wooden doors, pushing past a cameraman to reach the hallway outside. She needed Marcus. She needed his legal expertise to untangle her from the federal indictment. But as Chloe burst into the corridor screaming her husband's name, she was about to discover that a corporate lawyer prioritizes one thing above all else: self-preservation. And Marcus had already made his move. Chloe shoved her way through the heavy oak doors of the courtroom, her designer heels slipping slightly on the polished marble floor of the corridor. The echoing shouts of the press corps spilled out behind her, but she ignored them. She frantically scanned the crowded hallway, her chest heaving, searching for the broad shoulders and tailored navy suit of her husband. Marcus was standing near the bank of elevators, speaking quietly with a man holding a thick, unmarked briefcase. He looked entirely composed, a stark contrast to the chaotic destruction unfolding inside the courtroom. Chloe shrieked, sprinting toward him. She reached out, attempting to grab his arm, seeking the protective embrace she had relied on for the entirety of their marriage. Marcus did not catch her. He executed a precise, deliberate step backward. Chloe's hands grasped empty air. "Marcus, what is happening?" Chloe gasped, her voice shrill and trembling. "The FBI, or the IRS. They just arrested Mom and Dad. They put them in handcuffs right in front of the cameras. You have to call your partners. You have to fix this." Marcus adjusted his cuffs, his expression devoid of any warmth or spousal concern. He looked at her with the cold, calculating detachment of a litigator assessing a hostile witness. "I cannot fix this," Chloe Marcus stated flatly. "The federal government does not issue arrest warrants based on circumstantial evidence. They have the Cayman routing numbers. They have the fraudulent vendor invoices from Ora Blanc. They have everything." Chloe shook her head violently, refusing to accept the reality of the situation. No, no, Daddy said he insulated us. He said the shell companies were untraceable. You are the registered agent. You can claim attorney-client privilege. You can protect the company. Marcus let out a harsh, humorless laugh. He turned to the man standing next to him, who silently handed Marcus a single crisp document from his briefcase. You still do not understand how the real world operates, do you? Marcus said, looking back at his wife with unmistakable disgust. I am a senior partner at a Manhattan law firm. I spent 20 years building a spotless reputation. I am not going to federal prison because your father used my credentials to launder stolen money to fund your lip gloss brand. He held the document out toward her. What is that? Chloe whispered, staring at the paper as if it were coated in poison. It is a petition for dissolution of marriage, Marcus replied, his voice devoid of emotion. I filed it electronically at 7 o'clock this morning. Chloe stared at him, the color draining entirely from her face. You are leaving me. Right now. My parents are in handcuffs and you are divorcing me. I am legally severing my connection to a criminal enterprise, Marcus corrected her sharply. Last night, after Clara presented the offshore ledgers during our mediation, I contacted my own legal counsel. We reached out directly to the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He stepped closer, ensuring she heard every devastating word over the noise of the hallway. I agreed to provide full cooperation as a material witness for the prosecution. I handed over every internal email compliance filing and financial record relating to Aura Blanc Cosmetics. In exchange, the federal government granted me full immunity from prosecution regarding your family's money laundering syndicate. The betrayal hit Chloe with a physical force. She staggered backward, her back hitting the cool marble wall of the corridor. The husband she constantly paraded at high society galas, the man she used as a weapon to belittle my accounting career, had just traded her family to the federal government to save his own license. You sold us out. Chloe choked out, her voice barely audible. You sold yourselves out the minute you started stealing from a dying man, Marcus countered coldly. I am simply ensuring the blast radius does not incinerate my career. He turned away from her, motioning for the elevator. The man with the briefcase, clearly his personal attorney, followed close behind. Marcus did not look back as the elevator doors chimed and slid open. He stepped inside, severing his ties to the Sterling family legacy permanently. Chloe slid slowly down the marble wall, her knees buckling beneath her. The pristine, untouchable golden child of the Sterling family collapsed onto the filthy courthouse floor. She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. There was no designer handbag to throw. There was no live stream camera to manipulate. There was no arrogant father to write a check, and no society mother to intimidate her enemies. Chloe was completely, utterly alone, stripped of every protection she had ever known. I watched the scene unfold from the courtroom doorway. I felt no urge to comfort her. I felt no desire to kick her while she was down. The systemic dismantling of the Sterling family was complete. They had cannibalized each other exactly as I predicted they would when faced with genuine consequences. The internal conflict was over. The family unit was permanently destroyed, replaced by criminal defendants and hostile witnesses. But my work was not entirely finished. While Chloe wept on the floor and my parents were processed through federal booking, I still had one final loose end to address. The financial and legal retribution had been executed perfectly. Now I needed to confront the patriarch one last time, not as a victim seeking closure, but as the architect of his absolute ruin. A week later, the adrenaline of the courthouse raid had settled into the grim, bureaucratic reality of the federal justice system. Richard was denied bail deemed a flight risk due to the extensive offshore banking network I had exposed. He was sitting in a holding cell awaiting his arraignment. I received a notification from my attorney. Richard Sterling had formally requested a visitor. He wanted to speak with me. I accepted the request. I was not going to the detention center to offer forgiveness or negotiate a plea deal. I was going to deliver a message. He needed to understand precisely why his empire fell, and he needed to hear it directly from the daughter he threw away. The Metropolitan Correctional Center in Lower Manhattan offered a stark contrast to the opulence of the Hamptons. The air smelled of industrial bleach and stale sweat. Fluorescent lights buzzed relentlessly overhead. I surrendered my phone, cleared the metal detectors, and followed a corrections officer down a long, colorless corridor. I sat in a small visiting booth, waiting behind a thick panel of reinforced scratch-resistant acrylic glass. A heavy steel door buzzed open on the opposite side. Richard Sterling shuffled into the booth. The transformation was staggering. The imposing, arrogant patriarch who had dominated country club boardrooms and threatened my career just 2 weeks ago was entirely gone. He wore a shapeless, bright orange jumpsuit. Without his expensive tailoring and regular haircuts, he looked frail, hollowed out, and aged by at least a decade. The deep lines around his mouth were etched with a profound, consuming exhaustion. He sat down heavily on the metal stool, picking up the black plastic telephone receiver with trembling hands. I picked up my receiver, keeping my posture straight and my expression neutral. Clara Richard began his voice rasping through the speaker. It lacked the booming resonance he used to intimidate his subordinates. "Thank you for coming." I did not respond. I simply waited. I was not here to participate in a dialogue. I was here to witness the final stage of his capitulation. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting nervously around the sterile booth before meeting my gaze. Things have spiraled out of control. The federal prosecutors are threatening Vivian with a maximum sentence unless she cooperates against me. The bank initiated foreclosure proceedings on the Beacon Hill property. Everything is gone, Clara. Everything. He pressed his free hand against the acrylic glass, leaving a greasy smear on the surface. "You have to help us," Richard pleaded, his voice breaking into a desperate, wet sob. "You are a forensic accountant. You know how to reclassify the ledgers. You can tell the prosecutors the offshore accounts were legitimate family investments. Tell them the tax discrepancies were an administrative oversight. If you retract the whistleblower submission, my defense attorneys can negotiate a civil penalty instead of prison time." I watched him cry. I watched the man who threw me out into the rain at 18 years old beg for mercy. I felt no satisfaction. I felt no lingering anger. I felt the precise, cold clarity of an auditor identifying a critical error on a balance sheet. "You want me to commit perjury to dismantle a federal indictment?" I stated, my voice echoing clearly through the receiver. "You want me to risk a felony conviction to protect a money-laundering operation that you built?" "I will give you the Hamptons house," Richard bargained, frantically ignoring my legal reality. "I will sign whatever quitclaim deed you want. I will transfer the remaining trust funds directly into your account. Just fix this, Clara, please. We are family. I am your father. I made mistakes, but we can start over." I looked at him through the thick glass. The sheer audacity of his negotiation tactics remained intact, even dressed in prison-issue orange. "Family," I repeated the word, slowly dissecting it. "A family does not forge a dying man's signature to steal his legacy. A family does not orchestrate a malicious viral smear campaign against their own daughter to silence her. You did not ask me here because you recognize the damage you inflicted on my life." I leaned forward slightly, lowering my voice. "You are not apologizing because you hurt me, Richard. You are apologizing because you got caught." Richard recoiled as if struck. The desperate pleading facade fractured, revealing a flash of the bitter, aggressive narcissist beneath. "You owe me," he hissed, his voice dropping into a vicious whisper. "I put a roof over your head. I paid for your childhood. You owe this family your loyalty." "I owe you nothing," I countered, my tone absolute and unwavering. "I paid for my own education. I built my own career. I secured my own CPA license while you actively attempted to destroy it. Your loyalty is conditional, based entirely on who serves your financial interests." I stood up, holding the receiver loosely in my hand. "I am not the architect of your destruction, Richard. You are. The federal government is prosecuting you based on your own fraudulent wire transfers, your own tax evasion, and your own offshore shell companies. My only action was ensuring the correct authorities receive the data. Your sentence will be determined by a federal judge, not by me." "Wait!" "Clara, wait!" Richard shouted into the phone, panic surging back into his voice. I placed the receiver back onto the hook, cutting off his frantic pleas. He slammed his fist against the reinforced acrylic glass. The dull thud echoed in the small booth. He shouted my name, his face contorted in sheer terror as he realized his final manipulation tactic had failed. I turned my back on the glass. I walked out of the visiting area, following the green line painted on the floor toward the exit. I did not look back at the man pounding hopelessly against the barrier. He belonged to the federal justice system now. I pushed through the heavy exit doors and stepped out into the crisp, biting air of Lower Manhattan. The relentless noise of the city felt vibrant and alive. The Sterling family had defined my existence by absence and rejection for a decade. They had finally been removed from the equation entirely. The immediate threats were neutralized. The criminal investigations would proceed without my active involvement. But the inheritance, the vast estate of William Sterling, still required resolution. The legal freeze on the assets would eventually lift, and the properties would be transferred into my name. It was time to return to the Hamptons estate, not as a banished daughter packing boxes, but as the sole legal owner. The house where the conflict began held one final secret, a quiet revelation that William had meticulously prepared for the person who actually possessed the skills to find it. The drive to the Hamptons usually involved navigating dense weekend traffic, a chaotic stream of luxury SUVs fleeing Manhattan. On a Tuesday afternoon in late November, the Long Island Expressway was remarkably clear. I drove in silence, the rhythmic hum of the tires against the asphalt providing the only soundtrack. The estate sat behind imposing wrought iron gates. For the first time in my life, I possessed the security code. The gates swung open, granting me access to the sprawling property that had served as the battleground for my family's destruction. The mansion was completely silent. The federal asset freeze forced Richard and Vivian to vacate rapidly. They left behind a sterile emptiness. The opulent furniture remained covered in dust sheets, looking like ghosts of the extravagant parties they used to throw. The air smelled faintly of lemon polish and enclosed spaces. I walked directly to the second floor, bypassing the Grand Master Suite my parents had commandeered during William's final years. I headed down the narrow hallway to the room where everything began. Grandpa William's bedroom was exactly as I had left it on the day I found the envelope. The heavy oak mirror remained leaning against the wall, slightly askew from where I had stumbled against it. I stood in front of the glass, looking at my own reflection. I did not look like the exhausted, defensive woman who had entered this house weeks ago. I looked grounded. I looked like an owner. Footsteps echoed on the hardwood stairs. Harrison Vance, my probate attorney, walked into the room. He carried a slim leather briefcase and projected an air of respectful solemnity. He had spent the last month battling the Sterling legal team and coordinating with federal prosecutors. The surrogate court officially validated the document I found behind the mirror the previous afternoon. The estate transfer was legally binding. The title is cleared. Clara Vance announced, handing me a thick manila envelope containing the finalized deed. The injunction on the primary trust accounts is lifted. You have full administrative control over the assets. I took the envelope, feeling the substantial weight of the paperwork. Thank you, Harrison. Your execution during the hearing was flawless. Vance offered a modest nod. He unlatched his briefcase and reached inside, producing a small brass safety deposit box key. It was attached to a faded leather tag. The executor of William's secondary accounts instructed me to deliver this to you personally once the primary estate was secured, Vance explained, holding the key out to me. It belongs to a private vault at a Chase branch in Lower Manhattan. William opened it independently outside the purview of the main trust. I took the small brass key, running my thumb over the worn leather tag. A hidden vault. It was a classic move for a man who spent his life studying the intricate hidden mechanisms of watches. Thank you, I said, slipping the key into my pocket. Vance tipped his head and exited the room, leaving me alone with the silence of the massive house. I did not wait. The curiosity of an investigator overrides everything else. I drove back to Manhattan the next morning, presenting the brass key and the executor documentation to the vault manager at the bank. The private viewing room was small and windowless, containing only a metal table and a single chair. The vault manager set the long metal box on the table and stepped outside, closing the heavy door behind him. I opened the lid. I anticipated finding bearer bonds, untraceable jewelry, or perhaps offshore account numbers that my parents had somehow missed. The box contained none of those things. Resting on the velvet lining was a thick leather-bound journal. The cover was scuffed, the spine worn from frequent use. I lifted the journal and opened it to the first page. The handwriting was unmistakably William's. Deliberate, precise, marked by the severe 45-degree angle that Dr. Vance had analyzed in the laboratory. The entries began almost a decade ago, around the time Richard threw me out of the townhouse. I sat in the uncomfortable metal chair and read. William did not document his daily routines. He documented his observations of the Sterling family. He chronicled Richard's escalating greed and Vivian's insatiable vanity. He noted the subtle ways they began restricting his access to his own accounts, citing his failing health as an excuse for their aggressive financial control. I watched Richard shift $200,000 into a Nevada holding company today. An entry from 3 years ago read, "He thinks I do not understand digital banking. He thinks I am too old to notice the discrepancies on the quarterly statements. They are bleeding me dry to fund Chloe's ridiculous vanity projects." I turned the page. The entries shifted focus, moving away from his son's theft and centering entirely on me. "Clara passed her CPA exam today," he wrote. "I saw the announcement on the state registry. She paid her own tuition. She secured a position at a top firm without a single introduction from Richard. She built a life from the pavement up." Another entry dated a year later detailed a conversation he had overheard between my parents. "Vivian laughed today about Clara living in a small apartment. She called her a failure. They are blind. They do not see the intellect she possesses. They do not realize they created the exact kind of predator who hunts people like them." The final entry was dated 1 week before his death, the exact day he signed the revised will. "I cannot stop Richard from stealing the money while I am alive. He isolated me from my legal counsel. But I can lay a trap for him when I am gone. I hid the true will behind the mirror in my bedroom. I know Vivian will not clean my room. She hates the smell of age. I know Chloe will not do it. She despises physical labor. They will force Clara to pack my belongings because they view her as a servant. Clara will find the envelope. And Clara is the only person in this family with the forensic capability, the legal knowledge, and the sheer ruthlessness required to dismantle their operation." I closed the journal. My breath caught in my throat. For 10 years, I believed I was entirely alone. I believed I was the outcast, the unwanted variable in a perfectly curated family equation. I thought I had to forge my own armor because no one would ever protect me. William Sterling knew exactly what he was doing. He did not hide the will behind the mirror to protect it from Richard. He hid it there because he knew it was the only place I would find it. He weaponized his own death, utilizing my specific professional skills to execute a posthumous strike against his abusers. He saw my value. He recognized my strength. He entrusted me with his legacy because he knew I was the only one capable of wielding it as a sword. A single tear slipped down my cheek, landing on the worn leather cover of the journal. It was not a tear of grief for a lost grandfather. It was a tear of profound, overwhelming release. I had spent my entire adult life trying to prove my worth to a family that was fundamentally incapable of recognizing it. I wiped the tear away. The weight of the Sterling family's rejection, a burden I had carried since I was 18, evaporated in the sterile air of the bank vault. I had not failed them. They had failed me. I was always valuable. I was just born into the wrong house. I placed the journal into my briefcase. The emotional closure was complete. The past was permanently categorized and filed away. Now I possessed $4 million in real estate, complete control over a massive trust fund, and a reputation as a forensic accountant who could single-handedly destroy a federal money-laundering syndicate. The destruction phase was over. It was time to build a new empire on the ashes of the old one. 6 months later. The dust from the implosion finally settled, leaving a vastly altered landscape in its wake. The federal machinery operates with a slow, grinding inevitability. Once the gears catch, Nothing stops the crushing momentum. Chloe learned this lesson in the most humiliating forum possible, a federal bankruptcy court. Aura Blanc Cosmetics did not file for Chapter 11 restructuring. They lacked the legitimate revenue to reorganize. The judge ordered a Chapter 7 total liquidation. I tracked the public dockets from my office. The court-appointed trustee seized the company warehouse. The thousands of unsold skincare products, the lavish packaging, the expensive marketing displays that fueled her influencer facade were auctioned off in bulk lots for pennies on the dollar to discount liquidators. The Tribeca penthouse was surrendered to creditors. Her millions of online followers evaporated the moment the federal indictment linking her brand to elder exploitation hit the national news cycle. Chloe vanished from the public eye. The golden child stripped of her stolen capital, and her enabling parents simply ceased to exist in the circles she once dominated. Richard and Vivian faced a far more severe reckoning. The Department of Justice does not extend leniency to affluent tax evaders who manipulate the elderly. Their defense attorneys attempted to negotiate a soft plea agreement suggesting house arrest or a brief stint in a minimum security camp. The federal prosecutors, armed with my comprehensive offshore routing ledgers and Marcus acting as a cooperating witness, laughed at the proposal. My parents were currently confined to a federal detention center awaiting their formal sentencing date. The sentencing guidelines for their specific combination of wire fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy carried a mandatory minimum of 7 years in a federal penitentiary. The federal system offers no parole. They will serve every single day of that sentence behind concrete walls, wearing identical uniforms, stripped of the country club prestige they valued above human life. The government seized their remaining domestic properties and liquidated their portfolios to pay the massive restitution owed to the Internal Revenue Service. The Sterling patriarch and his society wife were reduced to federal inmates with zero net worth. My own financial trajectory took a dramatically different path, governed by the precise mechanics of federal law. When a citizen provides the government with actionable intelligence, resulting in the successful collection of unpaid taxes and penalties, the Internal Revenue Service Whistleblower Office issues an informant award. Under Section 7623 of the Internal Revenue Code, the whistleblower is entitled to a mandatory percentage of the recovered funds. The offshore accounts Richard hid in the Cayman Islands held millions. The penalties and interest assessed by the federal government doubled that figure. When the collection process concluded, the United States Treasury wired 15% of the total recovered assets directly into my corporate holding account. It was a staggering sum of capital, a windfall of clean, legitimate money born directly from the exposure of their deceit. I did not purchase a sports car. I did not buy designer handbags to flaunt on social media. I channeled every single dollar into the foundation of a new empire. I leased a pristine glass-walled office space in the financial district of Manhattan. I registered a new corporate entity, Sterling and Associates. I reclaimed my grandfather's name from the criminals who tarnished it and mounted it on a brushed steel plaque next to the elevator bank. My firm does not handle standard corporate tax returns or routine audits. We specialize exclusively in forensic accounting and litigation support for cases involving the financial exploitation of the elderly. I hired a team of brilliant, hungry investigators and aggressive probate attorneys. We trace hidden assets for vulnerable seniors. We dismantle fraudulent trusts set up by greedy relatives. We partner with local prosecutors to build airtight financial dossiers against predators who hide behind family ties. The people who assume the elderly are easy targets now face a specialized firm dedicated entirely to hunting them down. I transformed the trauma of my own family history into a highly profitable, ruthlessly efficient weapon for justice. On a crisp Tuesday morning in late October, I stood on the expansive cedar balcony of the Hamptons estate. The air held the sharp, bracing chill of impending winter. I gripped a warm ceramic mug of dark roast coffee, watching the Atlantic Ocean waves crash rhythmically against the private shoreline. The mansion behind me was no longer a silent mausoleum covered in dust sheets. I had hired a team of contractors to renovate the interior. We tore out the dark, oppressive mahogany paneling Richard favored and replaced it with light, modern materials. I removed Vivian's ostentatious chandeliers and installed clean, minimalist lighting. I excised every visual reminder of their reign, reshaping the architecture to reflect my own vision. The property was vibrant, filled with sunlight and the quiet hum of a life built on solid ground. I took a slow sip of my coffee. The oppressive weight I carried for a decade was gone. There were no more manipulative text messages threatening my career. There were no more arrogant ultimatums delivered across polished conference tables. The toxic obligations of blood relations had been severed by the sharp edge of the law. My cell phone rested on the glass patio table nearby, the screen illuminated with a soft chime. I set my mug down on the railing and picked up the device. The notification indicated a secure intake form had just been submitted through the Sterling & Associates client portal. I opened the encrypted application. The prospective client was a junior attorney representing a 75-year-old widow in Connecticut. The case notes detailed a familiar pattern: a sudden transfer of power of attorney, unexplained withdrawals from a retirement account, a supposedly successful son who recently launched a suspicious real estate venture. The attorney was requesting a preliminary forensic review to determine if the assets could be traced and recovered before the son drained the accounts entirely. I read the brief summary. A familiar, predatory focus sharpened in my mind. The raw data called to me, waiting to be organized, analyzed, and weaponized. The fraudulent son thought he was operating in the shadows, believing his mother lacked the resources to fight back. He had no idea he was about to step into the crosshairs of a firm that specialized in dissecting arrogance. I tapped the screen, forwarding the intake form to my lead investigator with a single decisive instruction: open the file, pull the public tax records, let us go hunting. I locked the phone and slid it into the pocket of my wool coat. I turned my gaze back toward the vast, rolling expanse of the ocean. The family that discarded me thought they could dictate the terms of my existence. They believed they held the power to define my worth. They learned the hard way that true power does not reside in loud threats or social manipulation. True power resides in the silent, irrefutable reality of the numbers. I burned down the rotting structure of the Sterling family to expose the truth. From those ashes, I forged a sovereign life where logic rules and facts govern. The decade of isolation was not a punishment. It was a rigorous training ground. My name is Clara Sterling. I am the sole owner of my grandfather's legacy. I am the architect of my own empire, and my work has only just begun. I watched the tide pull back from the shoreline, carrying the debris of the morning out to the deep water. For a decade, I operated under the assumption that survival meant enduring the coldness of my own bloodline. I believed that if I worked hard enough, stayed quiet enough, and built my own success, the Sterling family would eventually acknowledge my existence. I was mistaken. Looking at the life I forged from the wreckage of their deceit, I recognized that true survival requires rewriting the rules of engagement entirely. My journey left me with 3 unyielding principles. First, biology is not an unbreakable contract. Society dictates that we must harbor unconditional loyalty toward our family members, even when those individuals actively plot our ruin. That narrative is a shield constructed by predators to keep their victims compliant. Cutting ties with toxic relatives is not an act of cruelty. It is the purest form of self-defense. You do not owe your sanity, your career, or your future to the people who handed you the matches while they poured the gasoline. Second, cold data will always decapitate emotional manipulation. Narcissists thrive in the arena of public perception. They weaponize tears, smear campaigns, and aggressive posturing to distort reality. My mother and sister tried to drown me in a viral flood of manufactured outrage. But theatrics cannot alter a routing number on a Cayman Islands ledger. A televised sob story cannot replicate the microscopic ink pressure of a forged signature. When manipulators attempt to shout you down, never raise your voice. Gather your evidence. The loudest person in the room is almost never the one holding the winning hand. Third, your fundamental worth is not determined by the people incapable of recognizing it. My parents categorized me as a disposable asset, a scapegoat meant to absorb the failures of their golden child. For years, their rejection felt like a definitive verdict. But other people's blindness does not diminish your value. You are the sole architect of your own power. When my family locked me out in the rain, they assumed they were starving me of resources. They failed to realize they were giving me the isolation necessary to sharpen my mind into a blade they could never counter. I turn away from the ocean and step back into the warmth of my home. The silence here is no longer oppressive. It is the resonant sound of absolute freedom. If you are listening to this and currently navigating your own battlefield, fighting against those who underestimate your resolve, hold your ground. Trust your evidence. Build your own empire. Thank you for sharing this time with me. If this journey resonated with your own experiences, or if you have ever had to draw a ruthless boundary to protect your peace, drop a comment below. Please like this video, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for Hazel Tells Stories. There are countless other battles waiting to be uncovered, and you will not want to miss the next revelation.